For generations, we've stared at the heavens and wondered how, where, why. Men have landed on the moon, robots on Mars. But in our imaginations, we've traveled further, much further. From a galaxy far, far away to the last best hope for peace. And strange new worlds aboard starships driven by imagination. In 2015, Spiral Media presents the 12th year of Australia's first Star Trek fan site, TrekZone.org.
It's been a tumultuous fortnight for many Star Trek fans and former Star Trek employees. On February 24, Maurice Hurley, the man who introduced us to the Borg, passed away. Then Leonard Nimoy's battle with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease ended after a lengthy battle on the 27th. And on Wednesday, Harve Bennett, although we're now hearing that was a week earlier, Harve Bennett, the producer behind such great movies as The Wrath of Khan, The Voyage Home, and The Final Frontier, also passed away. Joining me via Skype for his thoughts is Larry Nemecek, noted Trek author, editor, archivist, consultant, producer, and actor. Larry, it's certainly been a rough couple of weeks. Thanks for joining me.
Yes, it's been a rough, over a week here now, both as fans and as people who are concerned that people's legacies move on in the Star Trek world and in the pop culture world, as we saw the reaction to Leonard Nimoy's passing. The NASA reaction was not a surprise because Star Trek and NASA have always had a mutually beneficent love affair because they're both about the same thing, only on different sides of the coin. But the mainstream, President Obama we widely know he's the first president Trekkie. But it just shows you the length and breadth of where Star Trek has affected more and more of the culture as we've gone along down the road. So, and then to have Harve lost this last week, or at least get the word that he had passed away, was just adding more to it and set us all off on a lot of reflection, I think.
I've got a few friends that aren't massive Trekkies, so they're not as affected by Maurice's and Harve's passing, but they were very much a part of Star Trek, and without them, Trek as we know it wouldn't be what it is, would it?
Well, right. Well, certainly with Leonard, because after Gene creating the character, you'd have to say that it's and Spock being there even from the cage, in his younger yelly self. But as it evolved and through the early episodes, and Naked Time kind of being an early key one, and then what Dorothy Fontana as a writer did for Spock too in the mix. But yeah, Leonard obviously leading the way and creating a lot of, even more so than what was originally figured, because the show was set up to be a lead, second banana, and a bunch of other people. And first Leonard bursts out of the box to be a co-star with Kirk, and that first year that was a little bit of friction as they got it sorted, and the agents and the actors and everybody got their mindset adjusted, and then D. Kelly managed to make Dr. McCoy such an integral part of the show, and you come up with the triad where it's like what do they say, the head and the heart, and then the soul, or the action man, or whatever, however you want to break Star Trek down, the popularity, and analyze it. But but that's been a comfortable fit for all the years and all through the movies. Leonard wishing he was not saddled with Spock, loving Spock, but wanting to be more than just Spock with his life, and then doing that, 3 Men and a Baby, Equus, all the other movies he directed, the projects he did, his photography, and feeling comfortable enough in his own skin to where he really could double down on embracing Spock and enjoying the fans and enjoying Shatner and Dee and kidding around and being very proud of his photography and his family and all that. And fans kind of, unless you were really close to Leonard, forget about a lot of those things. But
I've just started watching, because I'm rewatching all of the episodes to build the TrekZone.org database, reviewing them and doing screen caps and that sort of stuff. And I've just started, in tribute to Leonard, season 2 of the original series. And now, believe it or not, for someone that runs a Star Trek fan site in Australia and has been doing so for 12 years, I've never seen past season 1 of the original series. What I found immediately watching Amok Time, and it goes back to what you just said, that they settled down into these roles and they became, it really seemed that was the episode where there were the three of them, and it was Kirk, Spock and McCoy that we know today, and that carried through all the way through to generations. It was always the three of them.
Yeah, it was rapidly settling into that, and a lot of that was Gene Coon being involved also, as well as Dorothy Fontana, but who died in 1973 and wasn't around to see any of the future glory that Star Trek became, much less how the franchise grew into all the movies and the spin-off series, the sequel series. But even the end of the first season there, when you had, even though they were split up, but they were kind of feeling triad-y with City on the Edge of Forever. And even Operation Annihilate, they're working as a trio there. So, yeah, that was the seeds of that were very much coming to fruition. And by then they knew that not only, there was a time there when Leonard's manager was holding out for more money, saying, look how popular he is. The fan mail is out through the roof. The fan reaction is incredible. Shatner was the lead of the show, and there was a little bit of a mindset change, as there would be with any actor who was excited to be the lead of a show and have a breakout in the cast, sharing time with that. But there was room under the guidance of how they would sketch out the characters. There's only one captain, and then everybody loved Dee so much, and the fit for McCoy was such a natural fit in what he and Leonard had in the Spock McCoy banner, was just, and how early on in Amok Time they write the scene where you think it's going to be Kirk and Spock again, and he says, I want McCoy to accompany me, and he says, I would be honored, sir. Like right there, you hate to call it a duel because they're really, they're like wonderful battling friends that love, arguing of the bar bet or whatever kind of. That's why I really love the second season as kind of the mature, I call it the mature season, before things got a little cheap and under the gun with the third season, and things were still raw and exciting in the first, but they weren't quite as mature as characters and as a concept as it got to be.
That set the mold for Star Trek throughout the 4 series that would come. It would always be, it wouldn't just be the captain and his subordinates, it'd always be the captain, the first officer, and sometimes another one. In TNG it was Data, in DS9,
right.
You're going to stretch me here, but so on and so forth. It became this thing, and that was the formula of Star Trek, and I think that's what made it so good, was that it was storylines, but it was also relationships.
Well, if the movies became much more about the family, the band of brothers, not to be sexist, brothers and sisters. And, TV, by the time of The Next Generation, TV had changed out of that lead, second banana, but the ensemble show. When Bochco did, Hill Street Blues and then LA Law, the ensemble show was the going thing. And so for them to trot out 9 characters or whatever it was, 8 characters on Next Generation at the beginning, wasn't daunting. There was obviously still a captain. There was a first officer, but they all found their way. Worf did, and Data did, and Data was early, but Troy eventually, and Troy and Riker, and Troy and Worf, and Crusher came and left and came back, and the girls were together, and Wesley was, so it, and then
Don't
all the
get
other
started
stuff,
on Wesley. Wesley's a whole other can of fish.
Yeah. But DS9 and Voyager and Enterprise all had that TV had changed. Just like people now, when they speculate about a new series, talk about the trends in TV production and format and storytelling, from number of episodes to what level of TV, premium channel or a cable channel, 13 shows a year, 20, and then how they'd format the show, or even if it'll be one of the shows where, like American Horror Story or some of the other Fargo, where the cast and situation change, and maybe one year it's characters on a ship, one year it's a bunch of Klingons in a family battle, one year it's on some outpost somewhere with different characters each year. So who knows what the next one will be? But the brilliant thing about Next Gen was that it busted the universe open, where it's still Star Trek and they still have those shared elements, but now you're in a different corner of the Gene Roddenberry Star Trek sandbox.
just going back to Beverly Crusher, she left in season 2, came back in season 3. I've been reading some reports online that was Maurice had a bit of a say in that. Is that true? Is that sort of how it happened?
Yeah, that was apparently where the friction was. They weren't really keen to talk about it, but basically there was an issue there, and not so much with Gene or with Bob Justman or Rick Berman. And in the pecking order of the time there, Rick was just into his first year and Bob had just retired. But when Hurley left at the end of the second year with the writer's strike going on, and that's the reason that the clip show is there, is Shades of Grey is there, because he wrote a clip show to get out, as soon as he could. But he did wait long enough to sit down and entertain some new try to interview people to take over for him as the showrunner. Michael Wagner came in, who only lasted for 2 or 3 shows. Apparently, he didn't get along with Gene, or there were a lot of hassles trying to write Star Trek, especially back then. Now people have gotten it; it's more permeated the culture, but it was really hard. Even award-winning writers, Frank Abatamarco in the 5th season, that wound up writing Chain of Command about torture. It was hard for a lot of writers to come in and do the Roddenberry rules, they called it. Work in that tight. Everybody's perfect. The drama comes from outside. I mean, just as a writer who's used to structuring conflict that way, and and getting used to the science fiction aspects. But anyway, but Michael Piller had been talked about just after they'd hired Michael Wagner, and then when he left, through 2 or 3 shows into the season, with the show already zooming along, Michael jumped aboard this speeding train. And wrestled it. I'm mixing my metaphors so horribly here, but he jumped aboard this runaway, stagecoach and got the horses under control, and it was insane. But by the middle of the year, they had things under control, and then ended up the year with Best of Both Worlds. So yeah, and when Maury Hurley was no longer in the picture, they had the choice of, well, do we go to and Diana Muldaur did not really want to come back. That wasn't turning out as well as they'd hoped. So it was like, well, do we have a 3rd Doctor in 3 years, or do we reach out to Gates now that everybody else here has no problem with that? And they did. And, of course, then you got to reinforce the mom and son relationship again and go back to the Picard-Crusher dynamic and all that. So yeah. But Maury Hurley did looked around and saw how cyborg sci-fi was, where Blade Runner and a lot of that had gone. And came up with the Borg. And we will always have Maury Hurley to thank for that.
He really was the father of the Borg.
Yeah. I mean, it was a trend in science fiction, and he was just very smart and said, well, how can we... the idea of the hive mind, that was originally the little beasties from Conspiracy, which were in the day, if that had been done 20 years later, would have been so much cooler because they could have CGI'd them. But they had the little stop motion things that were almost a little hard to believe, or they were just bordering on the laughable, which as an effects person, you never want to have that happen, right? So, but between that and the reaction they got from some quarters about the exploding head, which was one of the coolest things they'd done to that point, and they got letters and they were told to bring it back. So between those 2 aspects, they never went back to those guys, those little creatures, which would have been interesting, but that was what Hurley wanted to go back to, and so when it couldn't be them, he thought about insectoids, and insectoids were going to, again, 1988, were going to be horribly expensive and hard to pull off. And Time Squared was actually supposed to be part 1 of Q-Who, where the Borg were introduced, but instead of it being the Picard from 6 Hours in the Future, and what the effects guys called the toilet bowl vortex, with the Enterprise going into the thing. That was originally going to be part 1 of a 2-part show, and to be shown that whole anomaly time, distortion was caused by the Borg. And Q was going to show up in the middle of it, and they were going to blame him for it. And then he's like, no, it wasn't me. I'm trying to protect you from who really caused it.
I think what ended up actually happening, though, was a lot cooler. It was Q being his typical arrogant self, hurling the crew of the Enterprise through to the Delta Quadrant as we know it now, into the path of these Borg.
Yeah, kind of a cosmic version of tough love.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And whether that, we look at it now as fans, and we will completely psychoanalyze the intricate workings of that episode and how it played out. And if that episode wasn't actually there, would they have met him, and would it have been the best of both worlds, and so on and so forth. And I think that all just comes back to Maurice. He wrote that episode, and he wrote 11 other episodes in Next Gen's first couple of seasons, and he's...
Well, and everybody, when people start looking at credits, remember that when you're the showrunner, you're doing rewrites on almost every script, probably.
So really it was Maurice that created Next Gen and sort of steered it in the direction, even though season 3 is sort of where it found its feet, and that's purely just by having so many characters. It takes time to establish them all and everything else.
That's true. That's true. And like Denise Crosby didn't think it was going to happen, and she left the show because of that. She loved the show, but she's like, you're never going to have time to develop my character. But yeah, Maury Hurley they stabilized the writing staff a lot, pretty much. Had some, Measure of a Man, had some great shows in there. But I want to say that it was really Michael Piller that came in and gave it the family feel. Because before that, it was kind of like the show of the week, and there wasn't a lot of continuity from show to show. Not continuity, but I mean there wasn't a lot of follow through. There weren't a lot of arcs.
And Michael's vision of family there certainly came in season 4 with those whole bunch of episodes exploring family with an episode called Family after the best of both worlds.
They were just trying to stay on. They were just trying to stay upright that year. He came in partway through the season.
Yeah, but it was
but
good.
That was his ideal. So we've kind of gotten far astray from Leonard, but the burning question of Next Generation was, you had Dee doing McCoy in the pilot. Who are we going to see? Kirk? Are we going to see Spock? Are we going to see any of the rest of the original series people? Especially Spock, because it fit within the Vulcan lifespan for it to make to be logical. Scotty, they wound up coming up with Ron Moore, the brilliant idea of the transporter time loop as a desperation save. And then who knew it would be 80 years later? But Spock was the one that made sense. So the big news of the 25th anniversary was the last original series movie, Star Trek VI, and at the same time referring to that in the events of a Spock show, the two-parter unification. And that was, oh my God, Spock is going to be on Next Generation. And then that was really a time back in the day. That was a time of wow, the shows really have bridged.
And I don't think that it was too much out of place, Spock's cameo in Unification. I think that it certainly is his character to want to help and want to bridge relations between the ancient Vulcans, the Romulans, and the Vulcans. I think that you could sort of tell that was something that Spock was always going to do without you even thinking about it, and then for him to appear. That
was something Spock could do on his own without the context of a crew or a ship, the old context you were used to seeing Spock in, with a dynamic with Kirk and a dynamic with McCoy and a dynamic with his crewmates. That was obviously not going to happen in one-off appearances. So that was a wonderful, structurally to do as for the character, much less the role and the character, what he would really do in history as someone who was outliving everyone he knew, as something that was burning, as something that taking on the legacy of his father, even as far as someone who could affect galactic politics and galactic relations.
And finally, Larry, let's chat about Harve Bennett. He came on board producing from Star Trek 2 and worked through to Star Trek 5. And what are your thoughts on Harve?
He's the one that got hired in because no one was... the motion picture made a lot of money. Paramount had charged all the development of the on-again, off-again series, little movie, back to a series... all the development money. They were building sets. They had commissioned scripts. They had hired, director Bob Goodwin. John Povil was the story editor. They were staffing up to do the series, and they'd spent a lot of money, and all that cost got dumped on the first movie. So it made a ton of money because that was 10 years of fandom's main objective, was to see a revival of Star Trek. And, it was, people were thrilled to see it, but there was still something, everybody knew there was something a little off. So Charles Bluhdorn, who was head of Gulf and Western that owned Paramount then, is looking around for someone to do a Star Trek movie, but pulling way back on the financials, and doing it for much more modestly. Plus they had sets, they had a lot of assets now. And the famous story of him coming in for the meeting and saying, "Did you see Star Trek: The Motion Picture?" Yes. Well, my little girl fell asleep in Act 3. Like a lot of people did. Do you think you could do it for cheaper than $45 million? And he says, "Mr. Bloodhorn, I could do 4 movies for $45 million." So he says, "Fine, go do it." But it's Harve Bennett that sat down and watched all the original episodes. Who had not been a big fan. He was busy doing TV. Who decided that of all those, that Khan character was just left hanging, and that would be wonderful to go back and look at with a time factor, because it'd been 10 years. So it's Harve Bennett that came up with the idea to redo Khan and go back and revisit that. It's Harve Bennett that found Nick Meyer based on 7% Solution that he'd written and then directed. So, Harve Bennett and Nick Meyer are the heart of what the biggest bulk of the original series movies and how they built and became more and more popular. Star Trek IV is the biggest mainstream movie. 20th anniversary, the studio's thrilled. They decide after the stations are screaming locally for more episodes that it's time to bring back a TV series. And then they come up with the idea to go, don't recast, go 80 years in the future and keep it going. So that was a pivotal year, 86. So you go back, and I know I have 4 or 5 people that I say saved Star Trek along the way. You might even argue that Gene Coon burned out Gene, gave him a boost right when it was needed, right out of the gate. And I'll hang my hat on Michael Piller anytime for coming in the 3rd season and really sending Next Generation into the stratosphere and leading everything that came later. We need to remember, and Nick Meyer said himself that Harve Bennett's, I always took that for granted, and I always would plug Harve and talk about him, but the last 10, 20 years he hasn't been around to talk, really in the spotlight to talk for himself. So I appreciated what Nick Meyer said when he sent his quote to the trades, that it's something I've always said. My soapbox has always been that we would not have had modern Star Trek without Harve Bennett. Well,
we thank him for that, very much so. And hopefully, as we sort of went on that tangent there, but that's the great thing about Star Trek, is that you talk about these people and they, as you said there with Harve, affects so much more than just what they were working on. Sure, he left at the end of 5. And he was really only there technically for 4 movies, but he was...
Oh, well, I was going to say, he really left over 6. He wanted to do an Academy... He wanted to do an Academy script. They said yes at first, then came back and said, well, we want the original cast one more time for the 25th anniversary. And he said, no, I want to do my script. And they said, you're fine, you're welcome to do that. And they had creative differences, and he walked away from it and went on and did a few more series after that, and some really outstanding. He did a Woman Called Golda that was Ingrid Bergman's last movie. She didn't tell anyone, but she had cancer, and he won an Emmy for that. And Leonard Nimoy won an Emmy playing her husband, so it was a great stretch for Leonard.
Well, and as I was saying, so he was there for that short amount of time, but helped revitalise Star Trek into modern Trek, build these spin-off series from Harve, making it popular once again, and we've just got to thank all of them and just be thoughtful that we're losing so many people. It's such a sad thing.
The world, pop culture, and then down to our Trek family, fans, the creative of creators, the community of the creators themselves, much less the fans, people who worked, the affiliate areas that I have, and gotten to know so many. Everybody felt that. You just knew. I said on Friday I was in a business workshop, and we had turned our phones off, but I guess I still had it where text could come through. And a friend of mine, Lee Wachner, texted me and said, it's so sad to hear about Leonard Nimoy. And I was thinking, he's back in the hospital for his COPD. And I went, wait a minute. Someone wouldn't be texting me about that. And I was like, uh-oh. And got up and left the room so I could see what was going on. And then I saw, and the internet was melting, tweets and the Facebooks and texting and email, and everything was just kind of, I don't want to say melting down. It was exploding. It was mushrooming with all the love for Leonard. And there was a snowball effect. It was about Leonard, but then people also realized, I did. I said, it's like June 11th, 1999 all over again, which is when Dee died, who was always, McCoy was always my favorite character. We loved Kirk, and I loved all of them, but McCoy was the one that always spoke to me the most, and I loved him in the mix of the others. And that was like a gut. Gene had died in 91, obviously, and then Dee in 99. And I tweeted something about how that was like a gut punch, but how Leonard's passing seems like, I said, I feel like I just felt a shift in the universe, And I think everybody was feeling that. And part of that may have been because even with Jimmy passed away in 2005 and Majel even in '08, we've got social media so much in our lives now, on top of 24/7 communication and 5,000 cable channels and everything. And people are instantly feeling and processing and sharing it, on Twitter, on Facebook, and all of that. And that was a different dimension. And I think the other part of that was, I went through the litany there of the cast after Gene even, and it dawned on a lot of people, we're halfway through the original 8. It's not a one-off event anymore. Dee was the first. With Spock gone, I even saw a thing where people are doing memes and photos and taking, and running the funeral scene from Wrath of Khan all over the place. But someone took that basic cast picture and had Spock and McCoy and Scotty and Chapel grayed out. Like we've lost 4 of our 8. And I think people were just realizing how precious this all is, and time is going by, and I think people were turning it into their own families and thinking of their parents, and their grandparents. I just saw an awful lot of that. Plus, obviously, people talking about what Spock had meant to them. I had friends in science and space and women even who had been, Spock fans. So much for the Geek Girl Revolution meme. I've been on that soapbox too. We've had women fans since the 60s. But the reaction across the board, it was personal, and also people getting a big picture sense of a change here.
Larry, as I said, it has been a rough couple of weeks, but thanks so much for taking a little bit of time to sit down and have a chat from the half-completed TrekZone.org studio. It's brand new. We're going to be doing a lot more interviews with Skype and all that sort of stuff. So for the first one in this new studio, Larry, thanks so much for your time. And I know that you've been really busy and you've got a lot of work coming up. So we look forward to hearing about that. And I'll definitely aim to have you back. All right.
Well, thanks, Matt. I wrote a piece. The Star Trek magazine reminded me of what we did with Dee in '99. They were on deadline and held up to do a little bit of Spock and Nimoy coverage before their next issue, and which is the same thing we did with Dee. We turned over half a magazine and did memorial coverage and got quotes and things from people. But I just wrote a piece for them and trying to do things on Trekland myself. And now the conventions this year have a whole different feel to them. And I'm sure we'll have all kinds of things happening around the country. And the Vegas convention will be big here in the States. And I've got some conventions coming up, so we'll definitely. I was already planning to talk a lot about Enterprise in space this year, but Spock's going to mean a lot to a lot of different people and a lot of flavors and stripes of Star Trek fandom. So I'm sure this is not the end of the discussion and the remembrance, and is for Harve Bennett as well. And heaven forbid, I said today, can we let hashtag RIP week be done?
Yeah. Larry, again, thanks so much for your time, and we'll see you out there.
Sure thing, Matt.
September 1966. One opening monologue.
Space. The final frontier.
One unforgettable theme tune. September 2016. TrekZone.org will celebrate 50 years since the premiere. In a big way.